I've seen a lot of America so far. I haven't been to every corner of this fine country, but I've seen the highlights, or most of them. It's quite a great place, the United States is, for the most part. But there are some really terrible areas in this nation, as we all know. And you people of YouTube want to see them. It's pretty clear. Whenever I upload a nice, peaceful drive through a nice part of the country, the clicks are, But when I drive through a bad neighborhood, people on YouTube are like, I want to see that. Why is that? Why do we all want to see rundown, poor neighborhoods? In this video, I'm going to run through the worst ghetto hoods I've ever visited. These are all places that are run down and neglected, where the crime is really high and where people are poor. Now, in my opinion, the worst hoods are all in the Northeast. Sure, the West Coast has rundown areas, but the West Coast is much more new, so the hoods don't have that gritty, grimy, rundown look. Midwest hoods look pretty bad, and Southern hoods have large areas where there are clearly a lot of issues too, but it's the Northeast where things look the worst. We'll see that shortly. But enough of all the intro stuff, let's get down to it. These are the worst hoods I've ever seen, and some of the worst ghettos in the USA. We're going to begin in the South, in the worst neighborhood in Atlanta, which I shot in January of 2021. The area I went to is here, located just inside the Beltline, only a short drive from downtown. Atlanta's been gentrifying fast. This is one of the few pockets that still remain this bad so close to downtown. Odds are one day, these homes won't be here at all, so I was lucky to see it. The neighborhoods I drove through were called Vine City and Washington Park. When I filmed this neighborhood, it wasn't a normal trip when I just kind of loke up into some hood and drive around and try to go unnoticed. No way, boy, this was Atlanta. This is where the big boys play. So I got up as early as possible, and I left downtown and drove the less than 2 miles into this area on Atlanta's north side that's well known for gangbanging, shootings, stabbings, and everything else you've heard of. Here's the most dangerous section of Atlanta at dawn before they all got up. Now we're going to go to the Midwest for the first time. I'm going to show you a part of Detroit that I visited in December of 2019. The neighborhood we're going to look at is here, in the Northwest Goldberg neighborhood of Detroit that's only 2 miles from downtown. Of course, Detroit's well known for being one of the worst places in the nation for crime and poverty and slums. And the auto industry left town decades ago, and that was a big part for the city's demise. Detroit lost more than 1 million people over the last 70 years, and its population's now 60% smaller than it was at its peak. But Detroit's changed a lot. The neighborhood I saw here was mostly just erased. Block after block were large areas where homes were raised, and the city was essentially turning parts of its city back to nature. It's an urban prairie. The homes left are mostly gutted or have some sort of fire damage. A lot of the alleys look like hiking trails. Now, this neighborhood wasn't very dangerous. At least, I didn't see any people lingering and never felt threatened. It wasn't the same type of ghetto we're going to see on this rundown tour. It was, however, a very unique one and a terrible place to live. The eighth worst ghetto I've ever seen is just a few blocks south of Montgomery, the capital of Alabama. This particular pocket of town is only a 2-minute drive south of downtown in a neighborhood called Washington Park. I went there in January, and the cold, gray skies and the light rain created a gloom over this part of town, which made it look even more dreadful. Now, Montgomery isn't a very dangerous place overall. It's about average crime-wise, and it ranks as one of the safest of Alabama's big cities. But down here has shootings and robberies, and it looks like it's been completely forgotten about. This neighborhood is beyond repair, and it's well known for shootings and robberies. It kind of looks like it's been mostly forgotten about. The poverty in this state is beyond belief. This is the 5th poorest state in the country. In Montgomery proper, about 1 in 5 people lives below the poverty line, but in this part of town, it's likely closer to 80%. I found Montgomery to be a very sad place, and the poverty seems generational. As I drove around this neighborhood, though, I did see people smiling on their porches. It's like, for some people in the South, or at least this part of Montgomery, poverty isn't what defines them. Now we're done with the South, and we're going to visit the Northeast for the first time. We're going to spend a lot of time looking at hoods in the Northeast for the rest of this video. This is McKeesport, a Pittsburgh suburb where there's about 20,000 people and dropping. It's about 15 minutes from downtown Pittsburgh. Actually, a lot of Pittsburgh suburbs look like this. It's alarming and frankly kind of makes you shake your head when you realize how many rundown many of our former great cities have become. McKeesport's main drag is filled with abandoned, rundown businesses, and its neighboring streets are crumbled. Homes in one section of McKeesport have all been abandoned. Again, this is part of the Rust Belt where factories left a long time ago and the people left to go where the jobs are. And whoever is left in parts of McKeesport are those people holding on, those who are too poor or too stubborn to move away. I was actually really blown away to see entire neighborhoods look like this. McKeesport looks like something you'd see in a dystopian video game or a scene from a war movie. The next two worst ghettos I've ever seen are both in the Midwest. We're going to begin here in East St. Louis, Illinois, in an area that was actually pretty large. I pulled into East St. Louis on a weekday in December of 2019. I can't imagine it's changed much since. The region had just received several inches of snowfall 2 days prior, but as you can see, today, the skies are bright. The air was crisp, and the snowfall made the area appear unusually charming, like makeup covering a bruise. Again, a loss of jobs and a huge spike in crime has made this once great place a place where people are fleeing in large numbers. Crime's atrocious, drug use is out of control, and there's no community pride anymore, at least the way things looked. In McKeesport and in pockets of Montgomery and Atlanta, which we saw earlier, it was certain pockets of town that are bad. But in East St. Louis and in our next worst place, it's not just one part of town, it was the whole place. We're going to see much worse looking ghettos coming up, but few are as vast as East St. Louis. Here's some of the worst parts of East St. Louis that I filmed. Now, the other Midwest city that really stood out is Gary, Indiana, which is only about 30 minutes from the south side of Chicago. Again, like East St. Louis, it wasn't a particular neighborhood that looked bad in Gary. The whole place is a mess. Downtown Gary looks as if it ran out of motivation decades ago, but it was the entire sections of town which I drove through which blew me away. Typically, I try to find the worst neighborhood based on crime numbers and poverty levels, and everybody wants to see which homes are the most rundown. But here, there wasn't one particular bad part of town. It was the whole place. What you're seeing here is pretty much what a lot of Gary looks like. And there's still 76,000 people living here too. The rows and rows of slums that you're going to see are slowly disappearing. Gary, like other struggling communities, is slowly being turned back to nature. There were a lot of open fields and wooded areas, which looked even more hopeless with the early winter brown tint. There really wasn't much of anything in Gary that was green. People in Gary make about $15,000 a year. It's estimated that 4 in 10 people lives in poverty, and about half the population doesn't have a job at all. Unsurprisingly, homes here cost about $50,000 on average, but in areas like this, homes are about $14,000. Through a government grant, you can actually buy a house here for $1. But I don't think that many out-of-towners would be motivated to do that unless they clean this place up a lot, and that'll likely take a decade or more. Here's the rest of the worst pockets I saw in Gary, Indiana. The number 4 worst ghetto place I've ever seen is back up in the Northeast. We're actually going to remain up here in the Northeast for the rest of this ghetto rundown. Now, when you go to Baltimore, it smacks you in the face like, you're in Baltimore, bitch. There is no denying you're here when you pull off and make the short trek from the highway into the center of it all. Baltimore has many, many, many terrible areas, but the one I focused on was one infamous for being the worst of them all. A pocket in this general area here on the west side of town. Anything west of Martin Luther King and north and west of Pennsylvania is generally the worst area of Baltimore I could find. In this hood, there aren't any red box machines or ATM machines or bike racks. There's no water fountains. There are no green belts or places to sit and relax. It's liquor stores, bars, clothing, and fast food. If you were going to create a ghetto from scratch and follow all the rules, Baltimore would be a perfect replica. It would be challenging to recreate Baltimore's rundown, desperate inner city. Every corner, every building, and every person is in its perfect place and perfectly flawed. A lot of people were standing around on this Sunday morning in March. Some were looking for drugs and booze. Some were looking for trouble. Many were looking for camaraderie. The abandonment, the trash, the almost lawlessness, There's nothing quite like it in the country I've ever seen. It's the most perfect American ghetto you could ever create. Then towards the end of my trip, the gig was up. Somebody spotted me clearly in the wrong part of town.
We'll, and Valerie will be here, so we can get it all done.
Yeah.
So.
All right.
But yeah, that's great.
That was the one and only time I stopped anywhere in Baltimore that wasn't at a red light. The top 3 worst places I've seen so far in my life are all in a very small general area. We're going to begin here in Chester, Pennsylvania, which is just about 20 minutes from the outskirts of Philadelphia. There really wasn't one bad part of town that was worse than Chester. I drove through downtown and up and down pockets throughout Chester. It was a cold, cloudy, and somewhat rainy morning in March of 2021. Chester is widely considered the worst place you can live in Pennsylvania, which is saying a lot considering the number of outright rundown places that exist in this state. And as you're going to see on this drive, Chester's fallen apart. It's filled with burned out and vacant homes. There's trash everywhere and shuttered businesses. This is a crime-riddled town where there's no jobs, where drug use is rampant, and where the schools are in miserable shape. It's all a recipe for disaster and no growth. And because of the crime and the poor economy, there aren't any major restaurant chains, there's no grocery stores or retail chains in Chester. Again, just like about every other place on this list, this city has seen a huge loss in jobs. However, while the population is down tremendously since its peak in 1950, the population loss is kind of slowed to a trickle. It's like whoever was going to leave has already left, and now those that remain are just stuck inside a ghetto box to fend for themselves. I had heard of Chester before, but I hadn't seen it before this trip. And because it's not so well known, I was actually kind of shocked at how bad this place is, and wondered why more people don't talk about this truly terrible place. Not too far away is Philadelphia, a city that's run down and where murders and drug use are well documented. The city of Philadelphia really earns its nickname, Filthydelphia. Much of this city, except for the western burbs, are all fallen apart and filled with trash and grime. But there's one part of Philadelphia that's the worst of the worst. That neighborhood is Kensington, here on the city's northeast side, kind of along the Delaware River just across the New Jersey state line. I was there the day before I was in Chester in early March. Kensington's notorious for rundown buildings, crime, homelessness, drug abuse, and abandoned buildings. The type of stuff you might see on any given day in Kensington are things you might expect to see in third world countries. Just a couple years ago, this was an uncontrolled community of panhandling, drug abuse, theft, prostitution, homelessness, trash, and murder. Kensington has also been called the biggest open-air drug market on the East Coast, and this part of town is why Philadelphia is in the top 10 for drug overdoses in the nation. Drug users around the world know Kensington as the Walmart of heroin. Apparently, the city's been trying to fix this place up, but some say the government is just about forsaken this part of town. It's beyond sad and mind-blowing how a place like this can exist in America. But words can't really say enough about this place. You have to see it for yourself. Here's Kensington, the worst part of Philadelphia, and one of the worst places I've ever visited in my life. Now, rarely am I intimidated by a ghetto, but the last place on this list, and the worst place I've ever seen in person, was truly scary. It's Camden, a city of 74,000 people in the south part of New Jersey, just right across the river from Kensington. I came to Camden the day after I had seen Kensington. It was early in the morning, and of course it was raining, so I thought that would kind of put a damper on the street crowd, making it safer for me to drive through Camden's worst pockets undetected. But that was not the case. All over Camden were people milling about in their burned-out neighborhoods. Many of the abandoned homes had been taken over by squatters. There was a police presence every few blocks. People just stood around on their porches, probably waiting for the rain to stop so they could get back to their street lifestyle. But it was the row after row of just neglected homes that was really astounding. And Camden's ghettos are all jam-packed together. It's constricting and intimidating. Like, you can't look away, and everywhere you go, it's all the same. The long streets of broken homes and graffiti and trash look like a maze without an escape. And the dreary skies and the light rain made the ghetto feel even more ominous. You can only imagine what goes on here at night. Camden's been completely neglected, it's burned out, it's abandoned, and it's left to survive on its own. To me, it appeared the only people who can live here are hardened folks who can stand to live in such a forlorn corner of New Jersey. The fact that a place like this exists in our country is a testament to just how out of touch with reality our nation has become. Camden, the crown jewel of all inner city ghettos, the flagship ghetto of all ghettos. There are very few places in the United States that have the inner city blight, the crime and poverty than Camden does. It's perhaps America's ugliest face. Hey guys, so if anything I just talked about upset you or made you sad or mad, well then do something about it. Call your local leaders and demand change. Chip in and help those in need. Make your community better, because communities don't get better without hard work and determination. America's a great place. It just needs some more love and pride.
This is Sage, Nick's manager. This has been a Corner House Entertainment production.